Greetings, this is the Questing GM. It's time for another prep quest video. We are now entering the chapter 6 of the Out of the Abyss, Blingdenstone, and this is technically the last settlement chapter or city chapter in the first half of the adventure module. And you know, it's been quite a while since I ran Out of the Abyss and for my group, and having to, in preparation for all these prep videos, I basically have to like read through the whole chapter all over again. And after having reread Blingdenstone for, I don't know, for the second or third time since the last time I prepped for it, I actually noticed that this might actually be probably one of the best written chapters of the entire module in comparison with Grotto. So Grotto itself had mainly a lot of had some good content in a way, except that it was poorly organized and poorly formatted together, and that's kind of why there's kind of why there's a lot of complaint about it's very hard to wrap their head, a lot of DMs to wrap their head around Grotto and trying to run a very at least try to find a linear progression for that chapter. And in case you need help with that, you can always go back to my Grotto videos, part 1 and part 2. Maybe I'll put the link down below, I'm not sure. But after finishing that and coming to read Blingdenstone, I would say that Blingdenstone actually is a lot more understandable and a lot more organized. I guess in a way, at least for me when I was trying to prep for this video, that there is a sense of progression going on and moving forward for the PCs to get through certain plot points and finally reaching the climax of the chapter itself, which is the most well-known Battle of Blingdenstone. So I don't know exactly. This is a pretty dense chapter, I could say, and I'm not sure exactly if I'll be able to cover all of that within this one video. But then again, I'm not being able to find a good breaking point for chapter 2. So we'll just see let's just get along and let's just see how far we can go, and we'll see where we stop. Okay, so all right, on to the main events. As always, I'll start with a basic summary, a rundown of basically what the chapter is talking about, different sections, what are the key points to really pay attention to, which is never a substitute for reading the actual chapter itself, which is something I should have said in all my previous videos. But if just in case you just need to get a general idea of where the sections and where the chapters are headed towards, then this is basically the part where you listen to it. Maybe I should start putting some timestamps to just fast forward to the bits where I get into my recommendations and ideas. But anyway, let's get back to the chapter. So Blingdenstone starts in page 95 to page 115 of the Out of the Abyss book. That's about 20 pages or so, and that actually puts it in quite a thick chapter in itself. So naturally, as all chapters begin, especially in the settlement parts of the module, the first section would be going to Blingdenstone, which basically just highlights who are the party members within the motley crew in the prisoners of Valkenvelf who can actually lead the party towards Blingdenstone. So the two most natural choices would obviously be Jimja and Topsy and Turvy, and there is actually a special sidebar that's dedicated to Topsy and Turvy because of their wear infection. That is on page 97 under the name called Cornered Rats, which kind of explains why Topsy and Turvy, why Topsy and Turvy are hesitant to go back to Blingdenstone, and if they are kind of like forced to bring lead the parties towards Blingdenstone, that's what are the things they would do after that, and they may actually find themselves find a second home in Blingdenstone, which oddly enough is not exactly stated like that's where they are from, but that was the assumption I made when I read it the first time. Few other NPCs that could lead the party to Blingdenstone is Eldeth, if she survives in Valkenvelf, the dwarf from Gondogrim. So according to here, I think it says something like because she's a scout of some kind. Oh no, she's in favor of going to Blingdenstone because it offers a route to the surface or to Gondogrim. So that's just a vote in favor, not necessarily a guide towards Blingdenstone. And the last NPC that they mentioned is Glabagul. Glabagul, which is a sentient gelatinous cube found in the Oozing Temple encounter if you actually run it for your group and your group manages to convince Glabagul to join the party. And his reasoning of going to Blingdenstone is because he senses some sort of calling or pull, towards Blingdenstone. And naturally, if you as we go down the rest of the chapter, they'll be talking about who's the dominant demon lord influence in Blingdenstone. So after that, after the within the going to Blingdenstone section, you have the additional rules about the Drow Pursuer rules if you're using those. Basically, it says here that upon entering into Blingdenstone proper, I think it's like within a few miles, if I'm not mistaken. No, it's just they would say entering into Blingdenstone, but as we'll find out later on, how the Blingdenstone area itself is sort of separated, sort of makes it a little bit complicated and a little bit vague. So that's kind of really falls onto your definition of what do you interpret as entering into Blingdenstone. But we'll get that in just shortly after. And there's a new interesting aspect of arriving at Blingdenstone, which is something that's not been highlighted or pointed out in the previous settlements like Grotto and Slupaduk, is that if there is a drow in the party, and it can be Sheriff, who is from Belkenvale, who if for whatever reason that the PCs never went to Neverlight Grove or never went to Grotto and Warsong Tunnels and and let Sheriff go to join Zookmoy, or as a DM you allow the party to have a drow character. Drow. So basically, part of the history of Blingdenstone, especially if you read the Drizzt novels, is that basically Blingdenstone was a major city of the Deep Gnomes or the Sneflablin. But in the novels, I think partly because they helped Drizzt in his journey outward to the surface, and also I think because they supported the Mithril Hall dwarves in the invasion by Menzoberranzan. So the Drow of Menzoberranzan actually came and actually sacked the city. So the city, even when you read the chapter itself, it sort of allude to that part of the history that Blingdenstone was actually sacked clean. Like they killed every residence in the city and basically captured any survivors as slaves. So the deep gnomes that the PCs will be meeting at this point in the adventure are actually you could say pioneers trying to repopulate the city. So they are not necessarily Blingdenstone natives or original residents of the city, but rather they're just trying to reclaim the city. But the PCs will still get to meet some original residences in the city as we go along into the chapter. So because of that whole history with the Drow, any Drow that attempts to enter the Blingdenstone city is definitely very frowned upon by the Deep Gnomes. And in the book itself, it says that a Drow cannot enter the city without making a DC 15 Charisma Persuasion check or being vouched by another Deep Gnome. And as a result of that, the scouts, Ivara's party and the Pursue party for the PCs will not be able to enter, will not be interested in entering Blingdenstone for that reason. But as a result of that, and this is actually something very weirdly stated that they never mentioned in the previous cities, but only particularly in Blingdenstone, is that the moment the PCs leave the city of Blingdenstone, the Pursue level actually goes up to level 5 automatically, which is actually the level where the Drows will have already caught up to the PCs. And that actually slides in very nicely with the next chapter of following after Blingdenstone, chapter 7, I believe. Yeah, chapter 7, I believe, where basically it's just a showdown between the PCs Ivara's entourage. So if I mean, based on how it's written, the Blingdenstone is actually a naturally good ending point for the first half of the adventure. Before actually reaching the surface. But you know, like I said in my pre-prep video, it's really up to you to decide where is that uh, exit to the surface will be. And you can always just stick the final chapter 7 final battle with Ilvara, and at any point after the PCs have left any city, could make whether it be Grotto, Stupid Dupe, or Neverlight Grove. So that's just something to point out, but I don't necessarily then think that's a big headache for anyone to resolve. So let's just move on. All right. So arriving at Blingdenstone on page 96. Basically, it just talks about that the PCs have to prove themselves to be able to allow entry into the city itself. So I mentioned earlier about the history of Blingdenstone with the Drow, but in the book it's also stated that the deep gnomes are naturally untrusting about foreign strangers coming into Blingdenstone. Maybe also given the fact that they're trying to reclaim a city, so they probably don't want to get interrupted too much in their work by foreigners and visitors. So they've actually introduced a new sort of mechanic into in this chapter, which is about changing the Sniffleblin attitudes. So it basically just mentioned things like making charisma checks and doing deeds that would make the Sniffleblin look favorably upon the PCs. And there are actually a few quests that the PCs can do while they are outside Blingdenstone. And also a lot more what they can do inside the city. And once they've achieved they've completed certain quests, it could actually cause an automatic shift in the attitudes, or it could also entitle them for a persuasion check with maybe advantage of some kind. Now, the thing that they mention here is that the attitudes here are indifferent, and they could possibly go down to hostile or friendly. And they do mention that all these attitudes are actually in reference to the social interaction mechanics found in the DMG. So it's actually very prudent that you actually go and check out how the social interaction rules actually work according to the DMG and not in the PHB. There are actual mechanics stated in the DMG as compared to the one in the PHB, which is quite vague, and most of it falls onto the DMG to adjudicate some certain things and what are the proper DCs to make to shift attitudes. And only by shifting it to the right attitude with the right amount of charisma checks, then would the PCs be able to enter into Blingdenstone itself. So that's really up. This is a mechanic. To be honest, I felt that was not really well implemented in this chapter. They mentioned things like if you completed certain quests, it would shift the attitude of the deep gnomes. But from my reading for the rest of the chapter is that I don't really find that statement often or often enough to make this mechanic a very important part. Which sounds to me does sound important, but but maybe the designers sort of forgot about it, or they didn't make it as important as it sounds. All right. So because of that, I think it's basically something for you to keep in mind. And honestly, I think that this might have been a better use in the Greco-Stark chapter, because given the whole paranoia of the Duergars. But it can work, and you can also forget about it in Blingdenstone as well. So it's also another DM's decision on deciding whether to use this mechanic or not. All right. So after that, there are some random encounters outside Blingdenstone or upon arriving Blingdenstone. So you have a few. You have drow statues. You have cave badgers. You have elemental vagabonds. You have giant spiders. You have a ghost. You have methods. You have oozers. You have were-rats, and you have Zorn. So from this list alone, I would say the Drow statues, the Elemental Vagabonds, the Ghosts, the Mephits, and the Ooze and the Werets are actually tied towards some of the central enemies and themes within Blingdenstone itself. So you can definitely use those encounters as foreshadowing into what's going to happen in Blingdenstone. But other than that, I mean, the rest could be just XP fodder for the PCs to gain levels up. If the PCs haven't, leveled up to the level that you want them to be. uh, Having said that, and now that I mention it, I don't think this chapter actually explicitly states what level the PCs should be at upon arriving Blingdenstone. And I would say, based on my experience, if your PCs were probably at 5 or 6, they could find some parts of the adventure quite a pushover actually. Not even easy, it's quite a pushover. Except maybe for the climatic battle, depending on how you want to run it or prepare for it. All right. Now, after the random encounters, we'll go on to the important NPCs. The important NPCs, oddly enough, they have actually given a very good breakdown of giving a lot of detail more to just a simple table of who the important NPCs are. So, according to the list here, it's Dorbo and Sani Digamatox. Basically, these are the de facto leaders of the new community of Snefflblins and Deep Gnomes living in Blingdenstone right now. Dorbo I believe, is sort of the one who's in charge of security and regaining and reclaiming most of the mines within Blingdenstone itself. And Sani, the wife, is sort of like the quartermaster of the new Blingdenstone, and she's having some trouble finding places for new Deep Gnome arrivals to live in. So that becomes a quest on its own later in the chapter. So, but basically the Digamatox, basically Dobro and Seni are the people in charge if the PCs are looking for someone to talk to, when upon entering the city. The next one is Nomi Path Shutter. So Nomi Path Shutter, it's described here as an Earth Elemental Wrangler, and okay, I should also mention that if you're looking information for the Digamatox, you should go to page 98 under the Leaders of Blingdenstone section. For Nomi Path Shutter, I believe of her, his or her information is found on page 101 under the Stone Hot Enclave chapter, where he basically sort of gives the PCs a quest of trying to find Earth elemental samples of a certain nature, which we'll get to when we reach the Stone Hot Enclave part. The next one is Gurnik Tapfinger. Gurnik Tapfinger is also another priest for a different gnome god. He is found at the Steadfast Stone on page 109 to 110. He also has a different quest for the PCs revolving a later part of the chapter. Then you have Kazuk Pigshine. Hopefully this is a name that rings a bell to you, because he's found at page 103 at the Tree Grotto. Basically, he is the deep known contact that I believe, what's his name, Salt Baron was having a deal with, and then he had gave the PCs a bag of empty gems, and yeah, basically that's the contact that the PCs are supposed to find and pass the gems to in Blingdenstone. Then you have Chip Green Goldwhisker. Chip Green Goldwhisker is the leader of the Weret community that lives within Blingdenstone currently. And later in the chapter, if the PCs gain enough goodwill from the Deep Gnome community, it would be sent as an envoy representing the Deep Gnome community to negotiate with the Werats, who are also Deep Gnomes, for some kind of truce or some kind of arrangement for the Werats to either leave or stay in Blingdenstone. And we'll definitely get to that when we go on on page 99 about Clan Goldwhiskers. Then we have Bora Warden Jaeger, I think it's Jaeger, Jadgr, Jaeger. I'll pronounce that as Jaeger rather than Jadger. And he is a ghost, one of the former residences of Blingdenstone. And his quest sort of occurs in page 98, which we'll get into later on. And then last and not least, we have the Pudding King himself, who is basically the big bad of this chapter. Basically a deep gnome who has this fascination and fetish with oozes, and who has been endowed with powers to sort of control, as well as maybe even summon oozes by Blacks, the demon lord of oozes. So naturally, all these Important NPCs will lead up to the Pudding King, and the main adventure, the main highlight event of Blingdenstone is to defeat the Pudding King himself. All right, so the next page would be all the different factions they are in Blingdenstone himself, and this is something that I thought that could have, if it was definitely hopefully was as well written as in the Grotto chapter. But here they pretty much have a good, these are all the expanded information about the important NPCs that were mentioned, including some that were also who were not mentioned in the important NPCs, but just some NPCs that you want to keep in mind of, that the PCs when you meet in Blingdenstone. So the leaders of Blingdenstone are naturally Dorbo and Sandy the Gilmatas, which I talked before, and you want to know their history, if you want to know what they're doing and what are their responsibilities to Blingdenstone and how they are viewed by the people there. Obviously, that's the section to read upon. Then it talks about the Miners Guild. Basically, the Pigshine family is the one who runs the mines within Blingdenstone, in and outside of Blingdenstone, and probably some of the first deep gnomes that the PCs will run into while they're still trying to get entry into Blingdenstone proper. Then you have the Stone Hot Enclave. That's on page 98, where Normie Pathshatter, which I mentioned earlier, but he's actually in service to another higher ranking priestess by the name of Yanta Coxrock, and she will only appear in the second half of the adventure. In fact, a few chapters in the second half of the adventure. So she's not here. She's not in Blingdenstone at the moment, but I don't think it makes any difference to switch between the two of them, between Yata and Nomi, to whoever's in Blingdenstone. I don't think it really makes much of a difference. Then the next faction is the Bora Wardens. Now that basically gives the explanation of who the Bora Wardens are. They're basically the sort of defenders of Blingdenstone prior to the attack by the Drow from Menzoberranzan, and they were basically the ones who were wiped out by the Drow, and basically their ghosts remain in the city, whether in crypts or within even actual residence within Blingdenstone itself, and that's where they would meet. And that's where the Bora Warden Jaeger is sort of the friendliest ghost among them that the PCs can stumble into. But also at the same time, they do explain that Bora Warden Jaeger is sort of training a new candidate to be the new Bora Warden leader, and to sort of reinstate the Bora Wardens as a defense force for Blingdenstone. So the name of this candidate is a living deep gnome by the name of Trish Adamantlepiece. So that's another potential quest line that the PCs that the book could have explored a bit more. Strangely, it didn't, but it's definitely a useful NPC to have around for probably a much later part of the book, which I'll probably talk a little bit on. How to run up towards the Battle of Blingdenstone. Okay. Then besides the Bora Wardens, they are the Ghosts of Blingdenstone, page 99. Which basically just talks about the other people the other deep gnomes who were killed by the attack of the Drow. And then after that you have the Ogremok's Bane, which is on page 99, which basically I think is just a explanation about this sort of elemental dust, a drifting cloud of transparent magical dust. Yeah, it's believed to be sentient, found roaming in the rock-like section of the settlement of the rock-like section of the settlement. So yeah, it's basically just that. It's just this sort of magical sentient dust that roams around in a particular section of Blingdenstone, and it's sort of I believe it's some sort of elemental controlling being or maybe some sort of elemental prince or something or something of that nature, and definitely he has some control over some drow statues that are hanging around in a different section of the city, which we'll definitely be talking about later on in the chapter. And serving under Ogomok's Bane is a Medusa by the name of Nahidra, which you can find out more about her in page 109 under Nahidra's Lair, who is basically a drow, I believe. It's a drow matron, or maybe I think drow priestess, who during the sacking of Blingdenstone got caught up in some greed and ended up being trapped. So if to find out more about Ogomok's Bane and what their part of the city is, and how they're affecting the city, it would definitely be best to read up the Rock Black section, page 107, and the Crystal Garden, 108. Alright, moving on, we have the Clan Gold Whisker, like I mentioned, which are the Warrats, which I mentioned earlier, and the main NPC to follow to know about that one is Chip Green himself, who is the chief. And lastly, we have the Pudding King's Court. So we have the Pudding King himself, which is, as I mentioned, is a deep gnome, who has also two sort of sentient oozes that he treats as royalty. That's Princess Ebonmeyer and Prince Livid. I believe Ebonmeyer is a black, but Princess Ebonmeyer is a black pudding, and Prince Livid is a grey ooze. So that's, I believe those, they have their own special stats at the back of the book, if I'm not mistaken. But other than that, there's just nothing else really special about these two oozes other than them having their own things. Okay, no, I don't even think they have their own special stats. So I think the chapter itself just gives like an additional adjustments to the basic stat blocks of black pudding and the grey ooze. So nothing really special there except for who the Pudding King is, and how the Pudding King came to be the Pudding King. Alright, so now we are entering into the first part of the first section of the book that deals with the actual Blingdenstone locales. Now, as I mentioned in the Drow Pursuit section, is that what do you decide what is actually actual Blingdenstone, and what constitutes as actual Blingdenstone when the PCs enter it and the Drow Pursuits end, or do the Drow Pursuits end while they are still on the outside of Blingdenstone, but within the definition of Blingdenstone area? Because the first section is called the Blingdenstone outskirts. So that's already one sort of crossing line for you to decide what constitutes as Blingdenstone itself. And within Blingdenstone outskirts, you kind of basically have four areas, which is number one, which is Entomok's Bane. Now, do not confuse this with Entomok's Boon. Sorry, do not confuse this with Ogomok's Bane, as I made that confusion the first time. Entomok's Bane is actually a hidden location, a secret location within the outskirts of Blingdenstone, and naturally you could say a secret location for the PCs to be able to find, maybe even in the later part of the book. So this is not necessarily a must go, but it would definitely help if the PCs actually are able to find it. And personally, if I ran this chapter, I would have made it quite a necessary component, in the sense, because this is the main quest that could give the PCs. I would give my PCs access into the Blingdenstone, into the Blingdenstone city itself, if they manage to find Entomok's Boon. Now, Entomok's Boon basically is just this giant, this sort of natural formation of rocks that contains a summoning circle that can be used to summon Entomok, which is a prince of elemental earth. And also, I believe if there are special rules if they summon earth elementals within Entomok's Boon. But finding it is going to be the main challenge. So finding it, you can find it, the rules of finding it, which revolves a whole bunch of survival checks and not getting lost, can be found in page 100. And within Entomok's Boon itself, it's being guarded by a couple of basilisks, if I'm not mistaken. Yep, it's a mated pair of basilisks that guards or lives in Entomoc's boon. And upon if they do actually slay the basilisk, they actually do find that the basilisk has actually left behind a nest of eggs, of basilisk eggs. So this is the second or third, I would say the second egg that the PCs can find up to this chapter, it being the first one being the Hook Horror's eggs from the Hook Horror Hunt encounter, and now the second one is the Basilisk eggs in Entomoc's Boon. The Temple Shroud egg doesn't really the Red Dragon egg doesn't really count because they didn't give proper mechanics on how to take care of the egg, and the assumption of the chapter is that the egg would be given to Temple Shroud or not given to or will be given to Temple Shroud, for his disposal. So and again, it comes with the whole dilemma of if you let the PC keep the eggs, how are you going to handle them having a basilisk pet in a good part of the adventure. I have some ideas for the basilisk eggs, but I'll get to that when we reach that part of the when I come into my recommendation and ideas part, which is definitely out of the book. Okay, so the next area is then there's a couple of mines the PCs will bump into: the White Shell Mine, which is a salt mine, and there's the Pigshine Mine, which is the one who deals with the metals. And basically, if the PCs are granted access to enter into Blingdenstone, they would have to go through the Pigshine Mines, which has a route that intersects with Blingdenstone at some point. So you can just pop them in a cart and just send them on their way. And then the last area that's of importance is the Stone Hot Quarry. So this is actually a place where the PCs, which is can sort of be led into finding Ogremock's Bane, I believe. And also probably where they will learn about Entomoc's Boon if they're so inclined to help out with Nomi Pathshatter, who actually resides who resides or overwatches Stone Hot Quarry, and that's in page 101. Yeah. So Nomi Pathshatter is the right person to introduce the PCs to the idea of Ogremock's Bane, and also Entomoc's Boon. So depending how you wanna lead your PCs around through the nose, and Nomi Pathshatter actually has a special quest for the PCs in the sense that if they actually do manage to defeat any kind of evil earth elementals, especially in this case being the ones that were affected or influenced by Ogremock's Bane, he would actually be willing to pay for the samples that the PCs can actually recover and bring back to the Stone Hot Quarry, and he's paying at a rate of 10 gold pieces per hit dice. So it really depends if you want to use the random encounters just to throw earth elementals on the PCs, and it doesn't necessarily have to be like exactly earth elementals. It could be earth elemental like creatures. We're talking about like the Zorns, maybe some Galapdoos if you're so inclined, which all definitely found within the random encounters and in the monster manual itself. So yeah, I guess it's a broader definition of the word elemental here would be the elemental type that is pertaining to stones. So what I would probably do here is to introduce the PCs to the idea that there's a thing called the Ogremock's Bane and what kind of troubles it's been causing to the people of Blingdenstone, and by finding Entomoc's Boon, they will be able to sort of heal some of these affected earth elementals, and it will be a very powerful or useful tool for the Deep Gnomes to have some sort of counter towards Ogremock's Bane, and in this case Entomoc's Boon. And if the PCs are able to find Entomoc's Boon, then maybe Nomi Pathshatter himself would vouch for the party to be able to allow access into Blingdenstone, and that's where the chapter can move on to the next part. Alright, so after that there's this 2-page section about Outer Blingdenstone, which goes on relatively quite a lot of deep details about how the defenses of Blingdenstone is set up. Although I feel it's actually one of the most wasted pages in the chapter, is in the sense that none of these actually come back or with any kind of significance in the rest of the chapter, because the Battle of Blingdenstone doesn't occur outside Blingdenstone, or it's not like a siege of invaders coming into Blingdenstone, where this outer section of Blingdenstone can come into play, but it happens within Blingdenstone itself. So I'm not exactly sure. I mean, it's useful as a lore piece or sandbox if for whatever reason you would decide to run the Underdark in 5e for as a sandbox. But as far as the usefulness in the chapter itself, it's pretty inconsequential. So you could skip it, only because if you're not interested in reading about Blingdenstone and knowing more about the place. Uh, so the main city proper is the inner Blingdenstone, which starts in chapter 102 and goes up to 107, 5 pages. So this is probably upon the pieces entering into outer Blingdenstone through the adamantium doors. That's probably where I would draw the line of this is actual Blingdenstone proper, and that's actually where the draw pursuit would stop. But that's really up to you. And coming into inner Blingdenstone after through all the defenses and all the traps, you basically have about 12 locations in a rather massive city. And one thing I should just bring up right now is that if you look at the map of Blingdenstone in chapter, and I believe that's in page 104. Upon entering from outer Blingdenstone and entering into the Blingdenstone area in its entirety, you will notice that the map itself is sort of split into 4 quadrants. So I believe, if I'm looking at it correctly, all right, let me just flip the map to its proper orientation. 4 quadrants. So I would say to the southeast is the area which the book constitutes as inner Blingdenstone. To the northeast is the area called the Rock Blight, and then to the northwest is the Pudding Court, and then the southwest is the Gold Whisker Warrens. So when I talk about inner Blingdenstone, I'm talking about inner Blingdenstone right now, which constitutes only that one particular portion on the southeast of Blingdenstone city itself. So just try not to get confused that the inner Blingdenstone represents the entire city. It doesn't. It's only representing a section of the city. All right. So they're basically, like I said, just 12 There are basically 12 named locations within the book. I wouldn't be going through all of them, but I will go through the ones that I found important. Basically, I think the first one is the reception hall. Basically, the point of entry after going past outer Blingdenstone. And basically here it's kind of where there's nothing remarkable here from a plot point event, but it's here you could basically give an idea to the PCs that certain sections of the city are sealed off. And in this case, I think the section that is sealed off to is, I believe, to the Gold Whiskers. I believe it's to the Gold Whisker Warrens and also to the Pudding Court. So they can only go to the other areas, which is actual inner part of inner Blingdenstone. The next section that's of importance is the Trader's Grotto, which I mentioned earlier. That is where Kazuk Pigshine is doing business, and that's where, if the PCs actually have done a deal with Wirtz, Salt Baron, the Duergar in Grotto, this is the place to sort of redeem, send the gems and redeem their payment, which Kazuk Pigshine gives them like 50 gold piece, a zircon worth 50 gold piece and 100 XP each. For whatever reason, in the book itself, it sort of explains that the moment PCs show Pigshine the gems, he insists that it should be a hush deal. Maybe because the deep gnomes don't look too kindly to deep gnomes who are selling their gems or taking their gems to outsiders who are not deep gnomes. They never really give a good reason for that. But in any case, I think the only main important note is that it's worth 50 gold pieces and 100 XP each. And also in the Trader's Grotto, what will happen if the PCs are out there is that there will be a gelatinous cube invasion. Basically, some gelatinous cube just squeeze through certain pipes or tunnels into the Trader's Grotto, where there's a lot of civilians around, and there will definitely be some guards who come and come to deal with the Gigantic Skill, and probably die along the way, and the PCs can help the defenders, and if they do, they are rewarded with XP, 50 XP each, in addition, on top of what the Genetic Cube is worth, and they also get a short sword, a drow short sword, from the Genetic Cube, who has ingested that magical +1 short sword in itself. The next location of importance is the Ruby in the Raft. So Ruby in the Raft is where they will meet a priest by the name of Glyphic Shroomlight. She is a priest of Singonjan Earthcaller, one of the Deep Gnome gods, and it's basically just a temple in the inner Blingdenstone area. But on beneath the temple is actually a whole set of tombs and crypts. The crypts and tombs actually serve two purposes. Number one, this is actually the resting place that Pelek from the Warsong Tunnels, if you remember, the Deep Gnome ghost in Bupido's shrine. This is the resting place where he wants his crawling claw to be put to, and that will complete that quest. So if they do manage to get the crawling claw in the Warsong Tunnels and bring it back to here in the Ruby in the Raft or Blingdenstone, and maybe see some rites, that quest will be considered completed, and that will be worth 100 XP. And this is also the same place where the PCs will actually meet with Bora Warden Jaeger. And Bora Warden and this is actually where you can introduce the Bora Wardens and can introduce the ghosts who are living in Blingdenstone. But the main important thing here is that Bora Warden Jaeger here has a quest for the PCs, which is to put to rest a spectre, a Deep Gnome spectre by the name of Vajuk, who lives in the different residences in Blingdenstone City, in inner Blingdenstone, and then to find the remains of another Deep Gnome called Uthashk, whose body is actually in a different part of the city, not in the inner Blingdenstone area, which we'll get to when we get there. And then after that, we have the staging area, page 105. Basically, this is sort of the threshold of inner Blingdenstone before entering into the Rockblight section of the city. So there they will meet with a NPC, I believe, by the name of Shark something. Let me just see if I can find that. Staging area. Shark X Barrel, basically one of the guards of one of the Deep Gnome guards who is stationed at the staging area to guard any entry from Rockblight, and basically obviously any entry towards Rockblight as well. Basically he would commission the PCs to enter into Rockblight to kill the Medusa who lives within, at least find out information about her. So if the PCs find out information about her, he will give them 15 gold pieces per character. If he manages to kill the Medusa and bring back proof of her death, then he would pay them 1,000 gold pieces. So coming back later on, when the PCs do explore the residential caves within inner Blingdenstone, that's still on page 105, I believe. Yeah. So in the first in Bora Warden Jaeger's quest to find Vajuk and find Uthashk, the first Vajuks can easily be just the PCs can immediately go into the residential caves to find Vajuk, and the idea here is to defeat the spectre, and depending how difficult a spectre fight can be for a PC of their level upon arriving in Blingdenstone. But after defeating Vajuk, the PCs can actually search that house belonging to the Deep Gnome and actually find some rubies, which is worth about 250 gold pieces each. So that's the easy part of the quest. The harder part will be actually going to the Rockblight section to find Uthashk's remains. Then we have the next section of importance is the Speaking Stones, another temple run by Gurnik Tapfinger, and this is where he introduces the PCs to another important quest within the rock blight area. So up to this point, we have basically three quests that happens within the rock blight area that can be acquired within the inner Blingdenstone area. So number one is the Husk Remains by Bora Wardens. Number two is the staging area where Shark X Barrel offers the PCs to kill the Medusa that lives within the rock blight area. And then we have Grinning Tapfinger in the Speaking Stones Temple, who asks the PCs to bring a certain spell gem to a temple within the rock blight area and cleanse it. So basically, this Grinning Tapfinger, the temple that Grinning Tapfinger serves is actually within the rock blight district, and he's asking the PCs to sort of help him cleanse that temple and by using the spell gem that he provides. So the instructions of how to use the spell gem is provided here, and also in the actual temple, which is called the Steadfast Stones, in the rock blight section, which we'll get to later on. And then the last important location is the Digomatok Hall, which is where the PCs will meet with the Digomatoks, both Senni and what's his name? Dorbo and Senni Digomatok, and this is basically the best place for the Deep Gnomes to give a big introduction about what's happening in Blingdenstone, what's the history behind Blingdenstone, what's happened within Blingdenstone, and what are the Deep Gnomes trying to achieve right now at this moment in time. So that's kind of the best place where you can pour all the expositions and plots on the PCs about Blingdenstone history and lore. And if they talk to Digomatok here, he basically offers them two quests, or there are basically two quests here. One is Operation Ooze there. Basically, he talks about there's this incursion of oozes coming into the city and accumulating in the northwestern part of the city, which is where the Pudding King's court is. But he doesn't know that. He doesn't actually know there's a Pudding King. He doesn't actually know what's causing the oozes to come into Blingdenstone. So he's just looking for information about what's about the Pudding King's court, and if they are successful and give him any kind of useful information, he will award them with a spell gem of the highest spell level a spellcaster in the party can cast. So that's actually a pretty big reward, especially with these spell gems. The second quest is Operation Exterminate, and this is the one where he sort of tells the PCs the Deep Gnome's position about the were-rats, the gold whisker were-rats who live in the Gold Whisker Warren section of Blingdenstone. And in his mind, he is just seeking extermination. He just wants to get rid of the were-rats so that they can open up, so that they can reclaim those places for the Deep Gnomes to live in. And he's just seeing them as a nuisance at this point. He sees them as a threat and a pest to the Blingdenstone community. So this is actually kind of where the PCs can sort of subvert a little bit of the expectations of the Deep Gnomes, and maybe even get a lot of goodwill and favor out of this, in the sense that rather than trying to chase away the were-rats, they could actually try to form an alliance between the were-rats and the Deep Gnomes and form a united front against the Pudding King. But Dorbo Digomatok doesn't see it that way at this point. He's more concerned about his current community right now, and doesn't see the real threat of the Pudding King yet. So this is kind of where you can just throw the PCs to let them decide which one they want to do first. You can go to the Pudding Court, or you can go and talk to the were-rats, like make that a choice for them. And in whatever order they decide to go with to do first may actually change their mind about how they report back to Dorbo Digomatok about the were-rats part in Blingdenstone. Alright. So the other sections that I didn't mention, I'll just briefly talk about. There's a tavern called the Foaming Mug. There's a bard. There's like a bardic amphitheater of some kind called the Singing Stones, and they're also like I believe, there's a barracks, and there are just like cultivation caves and caves of, can't remember where the Caves of Clatter was. I think that's where they summon all the earth elementals. But you can read up all that. I mean, when I read them, I didn't find anything particularly important. So you can just read it up just to make sure that you didn't miss anything. Alright, so the case of collector is basically where the weaponsmiths and armorsmiths are manufacturing their stuff from the mines. Alright, so now let's get on to the next section of Blingdenstone City, which is the Rock Blight, which is found on page 107 which goes all the way to 110. So as I mentioned earlier, there are three main quests that happens within the Rock Blight section. So the first one is finding Urta's skeleton or remains, and that can easily be found within the abandoned residences within Rock Blight section, and that's basically it's just a matter of going around some deep searches. The ghosts of Urta that they encounter within the residences is actually hostile, and he will attack the PCs. So I guess the only response that the PC can give is to just defeat Urta and then claim his skeleton and then just bring it back to the Rubina Raft for burial, and then that will complete Bora Warden Jaeger's quest, and that would just grant them the XP and rewards as it should. And then there are a few areas which are also not significantly important except for some minor encounters and treasure, such as the Overlook, which has some gargoyles, and they only put 2 gargoyles and 1 insane earth elemental. So remember, an insane earth elemental here is the bounty that the Stone Hot Quarry wants. Nomi Pathshatter wants to study, so that's the one that can bring back to him and get their reward for that. And 2 gargoyles actually would not be a big challenge to a larger size party and a higher level party as well. So you may want to adjust your encounters around that. And if the PCs actually do defeat the Earth Elemental, they actually do gain a magical item of the Earth Elemental Gem. So that's one magical item that the PCs can get in Blingdenstone as well. Okay. And then we have the Crystal Garden. So the Crystal Garden, I think there's nothing really special here, except there is a petrified deep gnome by the name of Vort. Who has some sort of countermeasure against the Medusa. Yeah. So the PCs can actually use the crystals within the Crystal Garden to be used as the reflection against Nihidra, the drowned Medusa who lives in the Rock Blight section. Just in case they don't have any mirrors handy for whatever good reason. All right. So the main highlight here is Nihidra's lair, where they will come face to face with Nihidra, and it's only one Medusa fight. She has some really good draw item and treasure, and if the PCs defeat Nihidra here, and they actually give a good background to how Nihidra became the Medusa that she is in the beginning of the Rock Blight section. But it's just a simple Medusa fight, and then if they either defeat her or run away from the fight, they can actually go back to suck X Barrel at the staging area and get their reward for that. So that's nothing significantly difficult. Then moving on, we have the Drow statues. So the Drow statues are basically is an entire garden of petrified Drow, also possibly petrified by Nihidra herself. And this is also where, if they defeat all the Drow statue, this is where Ogomok's Bane will appear, who is the one who's sort of controlling the petrified statues to become animated statues. The stat that is used for the Drow statues is the animated armor stat from the monster manual. You may want to substitute that for harder monster, depending what you're looking for, depending how powerful your party is at that point. Because animated armor is not necessarily a very difficult fight, and Ogomok's Bane himself doesn't seem to appear to have any stat block, but the main idea here is that he can be banished, either from the material plane, or he can be just he can be just banished back to the elemental plane of air. Okay, yeah, so that's what it says. And obviously you have to allow the PCs to make an intelligence arcana check to confirm that the Ogumok Bane himself is of a uh, extra planet origin. And if they find out that he's actually of extra planet origin, then they can cast. Then they will know what's the right spell to cast to get rid of Ogumok's Bane. So getting rid of Ogumok's Bane is actually a pretty big deal within the chapter of Blingdenstone itself, because it sort of frees all the infected earth elementals within the city itself, and that's actually a very important task to be completed leading up to the Battle of Blingdenstone against the Pudding King. So so if they do actually manage to banish Ogumok's Bane, and it says here to the elemental plane of Earth, the parties each get 150 XP each. All right, and lastly, the last important location of the Rock Blight area is Steadfast Stone, which is the temple that what's her name? That Gurnik Tapfinger asked the PCs to cleanse with a spell gem. So basically, in the temple itself, there are basically a lot of these stone menhirs, and the PCs are supposed to deposit the spell gem that's given by Tapfinger into the menhir, and it will activate basically 3 earth elementals. And upon defeating each elemental, it would be replaced by a Gallop Door. And upon all 3 Gallop Door, once all three Algorithm have sort of secured the area, then the entire temple itself will be cleansed, and there will be a halo effect on the place, and then Tapfinger would sense that the temple has been cleansed. So that's the completion of that quest. And that will be worth 200 XP each for restoring the temple upon when they have returned. So that's the Rock Blight area, and that's basically the 3 main quests that the PCs will have to be able to complete while they're there. And there could be the stuff of 3 sessions or maybe 1 session, depending how long your sessions are. All right, now moving on to the third section of Blingdenstone is the Gold Whisker Warrants. Now the Gold Whisker Warrants is also a relatively thin part of the chapter. It only runs about 1 page, 110 to 111. There's really not a lot of anything interesting of note that happens within the Gold Whisker Warren, except when they meet with Chipgrin, and they are brought to Chipgrin's Rise, and basically that's where Chipgrin will sort of talk to the PCs about what the Werets are thinking of in Blingdenstone, and the important thing here is that the Werets are the one who recognizes the threat that the Ooze and Pudding King poses to the entirety of Blingdenstone. And Chipgrin himself actually knows who the Pudding King is, so he is the right NPC to sort of give the description of who the Pudding King is, who actually turns out to be a exile or outcast deep gnome who came along with the Digomatox, and he, because of his fascination with oozes, he somehow gained some kind of power to control over them. Chipgrin doesn't exactly know this is caused because of Driblex, but he's the one who recognizes it because of Chipgrin. That's why the oozes are all coming towards into Blingdenstone. And there's actually depending what sort of proposition that the PCs come to negotiate with Chipgrin, whether to chase them out or to exterminate them or to form an alliance. The Chipkin's bargaining chip is that he knows who the Pudding King is, and maybe the PCs were smart enough about it. They could just bring that information back to the Digomatox, and then they could arrange another meeting between Chipgrin and the Digomatox to form an alliance. So this is actually a very delicate diplomatic mission that the PC can play out in Blingdenstone, and therefore there's a lot more variety to it than it looks. So try to make maybe if your PCs are into that sort of thing, maybe give them a bit of opportunity to have some intrigue within Blingdenstone, rather than just kill this, cleanse that, take this, find that. Those kind of quests in Blingdenstone. But if all else fails, if for whatever reason the negotiation just falls apart and falls through, and the Whereas decided they would just leave Blingdenstone, which was their actual intent all along, even without the PCs having to tell them to do so, because of what they see in the oozes and the Pudding King. They would have just left through a secret tunnel. That's also explained in the book itself. So there is a fail state in case that the PCs the things don't go well with the Werats. So now we come to the last section of Blingdenstone City, which is the Pudding Court. Now the Pudding Court itself doesn't have a lot of important things to happen in terms of what's supposed to happen within Blingdenstone, but it's basically just rooms and rooms of oozes. And it's basically the entire gallery of oozes there are in the monster menu. The black puddings, the grey oozes, the orchid jellies, the gelatinous cubes, and then there's even a gibbering mouther somewhere in the mix who's managed to infiltrate himself among the oozes. And they're basically just different rooms. There's a house center which basically houses this gigantic royal sphere, a gigantic halo sphere, where basically the ooze have just stuck themselves into. Then there is a ruined stockade where they used to pen up animals, I believe. Yeah, they used to keep their deep roughs, basically Underdark cattle. But it's basically been taken over by oozes. And then lastly is the throne room itself, which is I believe this is the actual throne room of Blingdenstone, where the king and queen of Blingdenstone actually reside in before. But he's obviously been taken over by the Pudding King, and basically that's where he is, along with his two royal oozes, Princess Ebermeyer and Prince Livid. So this, just gaining entry into the Pudding Court plays into the ooze there, Operation Ooze there by Dorbo Digomatok, which is just to scout out the area and find out what the real threat of the oozes in Blingdenstone. And that's already solving one part of the quest. And after talking to Chip Green, then only the PCs will be able to realize like the massive scale of the oozes that are actually residing within Blingdenstone and the real danger they poses, and they could actually overrun the entire, they could actually overrun the Deep Gnomes and the Werats separately if they are divided in that way. And even if they are united, they may not necessarily make this an easy. It will be a battle, and that's why the last section of the book is called the Battle of Blingdenstone. So the Battle of Blingdenstone is not about locations, but it's basically an overview of what the different each of the factions in Blingdenstone, in this case being the miners, the Digomatox, the Stone Hot Enclave, the ghosts of the Snaffling ghosts, including Bora Warden Jaeger and the Gold Whisker clan have thoughts about the ooze threat. And basically it's really up to the PCs to try to negotiate or make consensus between all the groups of how they can participate in preparing themselves to defeat the Pudding King and the oozes. And this comes down to the final and probably the most important part of the chapter, which is the task list, and that's found on page 113, 114, which basically states that what are the things that the PCs can do in order to sort of make the Battle of Blingdenstone easier, or as part of preparation for Battle of Blingdenstone. So the first item, as I've already mentioned, is finding Entomoc's Boon, which is at the outskirts of Blingdenstone, and I would kind of have like railroaded my PCs to find Entomoc's Boon before they can even enter into Blingdenstone, into inner Blingdenstone itself. So that would have been like an automatic success already on the PCs on the task list. The second one is actually to cleanse Steadfast Stone, which is the Gurnik Tapfinger quest, which is to defeat all the three Earth Elementals and regain control back of that Temple of Rockblight. And naturally, I would think that, you know, in order to gain safe passage back into the steadfast stone, you would have to clear out like the Hydra and the Drow statues and Ogormok's Bane, so that the temple is actually usable to the community. The other two items on the task list are, for me, personally optional, but I can see why the designers are putting it there. The first one is actually to harvest a wagon load of ingredients among the fungal pools and feed and fields from Neverlight Grove. I think the reasoning here is because you're supposed that by using certain ingredients within Neverlight Grove, they could be able to coat the weapons, so that it will not be, you know, susceptible to the acidic properties of the weapons that could destroy weapons. So that's one optional. But depending how you ended Neverlight Grove, if you even ran Neverlight Grove, that may not necessarily be that may not be a good option for the PCs to actually want to go back to Neverlight Grove for whatever reason. So for this one, I would definitely make it as an optional thing. I actually didn't even include it in my running of Out the Abyss. The second optional one is escorting a shop shipment from the mines, and there is remember there is a salt mine on the outskirts of Blingdenstone, run by in the White Shell mines. The White Shell mines run by the Scrape Dust family, and you can send that shipment of salt back to Grotto and trade that for weapons, for Dugal made weapons, you know, just to arm the army of Blingdenstone and Chip Green and whoever all the other defenders of Blingdenstone. And the last task list is to actually complete the quest by Bora Warden Jaeger. So if you actually do manage to get if you do manage to appease Bora Warden Jaeger, you could introduce his protege. What's his name again? Yeah, basically the protege, Trish Adamantlepiece Beast. Yeah, you can introduce Trish Adamantlepiece Beast as Bora Warden Jaeger's successor, and he can form a special unit of the Bora Wardens, and, you know, reinstate the glorious order of defenders, and maybe you can make them like a more improved stats, deep gnomes that will fight against the oozers, and, you know, in that subsequently make the fight a little bit easier for the deep gnomes. So those are basically the 5 tasks for the PCs to complete, 3 of which can be done within Blingdenstone itself and is mentioned within the Blingdenstone chapter. So yeah, so by completing all the task list, the results, and you can see the benefits of completing the task list in the sidebar called benefits for completing tasks in page 114. So what these are the things that happen if you do clear out Entomoc's, if you do find Entomoc's boon, if you gain the help of Bora Warden Jaeger, and yeah, that's about it, I guess. And maybe an additional idea is that if the PCs manage to negotiate an alliance between the Gold Whiskers and the Digger Madhawks to work together to fight against the oozers. So lastly, we come to Cry Havoc, which is basically the attack of the entire Blingdenstone community against the Pudding King. Basically gives you ideas on how to run the fights, how to sort of roll random encounters before the PCs can reach the Pudding King, and then the final fight with the Pudding King himself, which he has to go through the two oozing royalty, Princess Ebermeyer and Prince Livid. So they are basically just adjusted stats, and the main takeaway for this one is actually there are some spell books hidden within one of yeah there's when Princess Ebermeyer dies, the Black Pudding disgorges a pair of spell books, which has a very impressive list of spells that the PCs can actually use and copy, and they're actually pretty important. Then lastly comes to the Pudding King himself, the PCs can defeat, and the Pudding King stats, I believe, is actually provided. Yeah, the Pudding King stats is actually provided in page 233 in the appendix. But he is really nothing really impressive to look at, because he's only a challenge rating 4. He's only got basically only 49 hit points, so he actually can be defeated in quite a jiffy if the PCs just do the right thing or just target him in one shot. And after that, that's pretty much the chapter. That's pretty much the rundown of the chapter itself. And then after that is a leaving Blingdenstone, and basically what the terms of the PCs leave Blingdenstone at for. And then you'll be moving on into the next chapter, which is chapter 7. So that's the rundown of that's the summary rundown of all the important parts in the chapter. And now I'll get into what I think the actual flow of the chapter is. And if you and the best part of it is that if you've been reading, if as you read the chapter from start to finish, it basically flows by itself all the way. So there are basically altogether sort of like seven phases. I could briefly break it down to. The first phase is to enter into finding ways to gain entry into Blingdenstone territory, which I would easily say just find Entomoc's bone and basically problem solve. The second is talking to the Digger Mattox upon entering in the Blingdenstone, and that is where they would understand the city's problems, which is basically it's becoming an overcrowding problem, and the PCs are PCs are sort of like hired or asked to find ways to clear out some of the empty residences within the city, whether from ghosts, from wereat, or from oozers. And then the third phase would be the rock blight. As the PCs explore in the Blingdenstone and they talk to the local temples, the local priestess, and also the local authorities, they will find that there's a few things to do in rock blight. So they will move after in the Blingdenstone. They will move on to the rock blight, complete all the 3 main quests, which is cleansing the steadfast stones, defeating Ogre Moxbane, killing the Medusa, and also finding Old Heart Skeleton for Bora Wardens. Then after that, they would go into talking with Clan Gold Whiskers, and find out there's actually a Pudding King that's been hanging around, and what is he commanding. Then after that, followed by entering into Pudding King's court to scout out the enemies, to see the vast threat that the Pudding King poses. And then after that would be preparing for the battle. So it will be just trying to complete the task list that they were given, and then make the proper arrangements and strategy and tactics discussions with Digger Mattox and possibly with the Gold Whiskers to how they will fight their way to meet with the Pudding King. And you could say that the main army of the battle would be as a distraction, and the PCs are actually the ones who will be stealthing their way to make a precision strike on the Pudding King himself. And then lastly is the Battle of Blingdenstone, which is the climax of the chapter, and possibly the execution of whatever preparations have been done all throughout the chapter itself. So yeah, so that's basically the general flow I think the book is trying to lead you towards to, and once you know the flow, you can know where the moving parts are. So it's really up to you to play around with that. As long the moment the PC sort of goes off the rails a little bit, and I guess there are definitely some optional things that the PCs can fail at. For example, like if they fail the rock black section for whatever reason, or they fail at the gold whisker section of the entire flow, then you could definitely try to enforce some sort of adverse effects on the Battle of Blingdenstone because of those failures. But that I think that's more interesting to introduce the possibility of failure, rather than just forcing the players to go through every single phase as the book intended to. All right. So what sort of what sort of recommendations would I have about, based on my reading of this chapter, and what are the things to keep in mind of, or bear in mind, or pay special attention to when you're running this chapter. So I guess the first main idea is that the moment the pieces enter into inner Blingdenstone, present present the dilemma straight to the PCs of what is the main trouble of Blingdenstone, and it's not the Pudding King, or it's not the it's not the threat of the Pudding King. It's actually the sense of the Digger Methods trying to reclaim the city, and also repopulating the city. So and this is one of the recurring themes or problems that the book sort of mentions over and over and again, is that the city is reaching the current residences of Blingdenstone is actually reaching sort of kind of critical point in terms of population. There's just not enough places for the PCs to live in, and there's good reasons for that. It's because, number one, first of all, they basically abandoned or avoided all the haunted residences in Blingdenstone. So to control all these ghosts, it's the PCs will either be forced to deal with the ghosts one by one, or at least, or in a more story sense, you could say, the moment they can get Bora Warden Jaegers on their side, he will be able to control all the ghosts, or at least command all the ghosts, uh, whether by respect or by history, to sort of let the other deep gnomes live in those caves without bothering them. And maybe you could say that's also their last tie to the prime material, to the material world, to the material plane, before they would willingly move on, is to be able to defend Blingdenstone from one last invader before they are put to rest. And then the second cause of the overcrowding is clan gold whiskers, because obviously clan gold whiskers occupy a good portion of the city itself, and the deep gnomes need that space to put their new arrivals and population into it. And there is a tension between the gold whiskers and the deep gnomes, in the sense that the gold whiskers wants to stay and not be exterminated as pests, but they also think that if they are not able to get rid of the Pudding King, then they will have reason to leave, and that would actually endanger the deep gnome community, who don't know anything better about what are the dangers of the Pudding King poses. So there is actually plenty of good reasons why the Gold Whisker clan and the Deep Gnome should work together rather than not. And lastly, then obviously the last cause is the Pudding King himself. Because if he launches his attack on the Deep Gnome community, they wouldn't even be a Deep Gnome community to begin with, full stop. And also because they occupy a very good area to the pudding the of Blingdenstone itself. What I did for that one is, after they defeated the Pudding King, I sort of, as a good closure to the Blingdenstone chapter, is that I basically made the Digger Methods the king and queen, the new king and queen of Blingdenstone. So that's actually something that the PCs felt like they've done certain achievements of doing good in Blingdenstone, and actually making a change to Blingdenstone because of their deeds. Now, another recommendation I have, and this one partly falls as an idea, is that the Battle of Blingdenstone itself, and given the encounters they provide, I personally didn't feel really gives a lot of challenge. For a few reasons. Number one is the PC's level at the point of arriving in the Blingdenstone. If this is run as the last chapter, as the last settlement before the end of the first half of the adventure, the oozers, they are generally just not good monsters for PCs to fight with of a certain level. And one reason of that being, if you check the CR ratings of the monsters, and I know CR is not necessarily the best guide to the difficulty of monsters, but just take a look at, if you go through the monster manual, and I believe I may have given up this table this table spreadsheet on the Facebook Out the Abyss DMs group. The highest ooze there is in the monster manual. Let me just filter that off. The highest CR ooze in the monster manual is only a CR4. So the Battle of Blingdenstone is really a game of numbers. Like you're just throwing as many oozes as you can at the PCs, and they will have to just grind through all the fights to just survive, and at the same time maybe not even lose all their weapons. Although at this point in time it is quite possible that the PCs actually have gathered enough magical weapons to not have to worry about the corrosive effects of the oozes when they get in touch with them. And why I am not a huge fan of throwing numbers at the PCs with the oozes is number one is because it's a numbers game, and it becomes relatively tiresome to run fights after fights after fights with huge numbers. And also remember, certain oozes do split into smaller portions, which increases the numbers pretty exponentially if the PCs do not know the proper ways to fight the oozes, especially if they use the wrong damage type. So it's actually more tiring and boring to run a number game sort of encounters. So I was actually a bigger fan of using tougher oozes. And for that reason alone, that is why I would suggest you look into, and if you have those books, Volo's Guide, and especially Modern Kingdom's Tomb of Foes. And Modern Kingdom's Tomb of Foes was actually has my favorite ooze that is actually quite perfect for me, I feel, to be included into the Blingdenstone chapter. So in Volo's Guide, you will have the Slithering Tracker. Now, this is something that you could actually introduce during the Trade Grotto fight. Instead of gelatinous cubes, you can have a Slithering Tracker, and the Slithering Tracker can actually be quite a deadly challenge to the PCs because they're CR3, but it's a good foreshadowing monster for the PCs to face off with, to know that there's actually more to these oozes than just regular oozes. Now, the main ooze that I would actually highly encourage PCs to introduce, and it's not actually an ooze, but it's an ooze-like creature, is the Alkyliph. And you can find this ooze in page 130 of Modern Kingdom's Tomb of Foes. Now, if you don't have the book, if you don't have the book, I can't help you with the stat block. You're gonna have to find that through other means. But the lore of the Alkyliph is very interesting to me, is because that it actually attaches itself to doorways or windows, and it actually turns and it just expands itself in, it spreads itself across the space provided by the doorway or windows, and actually becomes a portal to the abyss. So that actually increases the stakes of defeating the Pudding King tremendously high, and I would think that actually suits a high level party to really see the importance of why do they need to defeat the Pudding King. Because if they don't, it basically there's an open portal from the abyss, and there would be not only oozes that will be pouring in, but also demons. So the it immediately puts an urgency to the PCs and the community and the Blingdenstone community to defeat the Pudding King, is because they need to close this portal ASAP, or else it's just going to be spells huge trouble for the entirety of Blingdenstone. And the interesting thing is the Alkyliph is actually a CR11 monster, so that's actually a very good boss fight, I would think, if your party is say level 7 or 8 at this point in the adventure when you're going in. And that's actually I think that poses a really good challenge. You could definitely reduce the number of normal ooze fights as the PCs are making their way towards the Pudding King, and make sure that the party is of significant strength to fight with the Alkyliph, and save the day literally. And if you think the Alkyliph at CR11 is probably a bit too powerful of a threat to throw at your PCs, then another suggestion that I would actually make is you can actually make the Pudding King a victim of an Oblex. So the Oblex is a new monster that's introduced in Modern King's Tomb of Foes as well. You can find the Oblex stats in page. Oh great! I didn't save the page number. Let me see if I can. The Oblex is in 217, and there are actually even Oblex spawn as well, also provided in, which is a new kind of ooze that the PCs can also meet. I mean, the Modern Kingdom Pool of Vote also introduces, and the Oblex is definitely a lot more scalable than the Alkylith. It can be an adult or it can be a elder Oblex, depending how dangerous you want to make the Pudding King is. So the adult Oblex is CR5 and the elder Oblex is CR10, which is still not as powerful as the Alkylith. So you could definitely introduce these two oozes from Modern King's Tomb of Foes, and it would definitely change the power level, the danger, encounter danger level of the Battle of Blingdenstone in that sense. So yeah, definitely look those up if you. When I was running out of the Abyss, Modern Kingdom Tomb of Foes wasn't out yet, but when the moment I read the Alkylith and the Oblex, I would say these two definitely fit into the Blingdenstone chapter naturally as a glove. All right. So I've already talked about how you could change the dynamics between the Clan Goldwhisker and Digomatox and turn it from a hostile takeover into a negotiation. Yeah, so that's definitely an area you could definitely potentially count on. And the next possible idea here, recommendation here is how to make use of the changing Steph-Living attitude mechanic. The doing the right quest, and then which allows him to make a potential charisma persuasion check to improve the attitudes of the deep gnomes. I think that there's a few things you can do with this mechanic which I didn't use, but just throwing it out there for your consideration. Is number one, you could maybe only introduce you can only allow access of the PCs to certain quests based on the attitude of based on the deep gnome's current attitude to the PCs. Maybe you could see something like the PCs will not be able to get the steadfast stone quest from Tapfinger if they are not friendly, if the deep gnomes do not treat them as friendly. They may only be allowed to do the Hydra quest in the Hydra quest only if the gnomes are hostile towards them, and maybe Bora Warden Jaeger starts off as hostile, but if they finish the first part of his quest, which is to kill the Spectre, they becomes indifferent, and then if he finds back old Heart Skeletons, he becomes friendly, and then therefore that arc is completed. You could definitely spend some time to try to find the places where the shifting of the deep gnome attitude unlocks certain things that would be useful to the PCs, and give them that sense of satisfaction and achievement and progression. But that may sound like additional work to you, but if you're looking for ways to make use of it, then these are some of my recommendations. And the ultimate reward of reaching friendly, and maybe even beyond that, and maybe even getting some boons, the DMG boons from King and Queen Digomatox if they become King and Queen, is that the deep gnomes will give them the final way out from the Underdark, because they know the way to the surface. So you could draw a chart a progression for the PCs to achieve to that point. That's what they are. That's by unlocking different quests, which leads to better shifts of attitudes. Then it will all culminate in the deep gnomes giving them the way out from the Underdark. Or otherwise, if the PCs complete the Battle of Blingdenstone, which naturally I would think, like, if the PCs defeat the Pudding King, for whatever part of the chart progression, they should be given the ultimate reward at the end, which is the way out. All right, now some out of left field ideas you could throw in. There's really not a lot because I think personally for me, the Blingdenstone chapter is written to be pretty well self-contained, and things that could happen, uh, things that could happen in Blingdenstone does happen in Blingdenstone. So I don't really have a lot to offer in this idea, except maybe for real random ones. But we'll just but like I said, I always throw out these ideas for your own consideration and take it or leave it as for what it's worth. Um, Now, if you're looking for a tie-in, especially this section about uh, one of the tasks involving getting materials and ingredients from Neverlight Grove to coat their weapons against the corrosive effects of the oozes, you could actually say that if the pieces actually do end up leading Sovereign Basilia from Neverlight Grove, you could actually take them and lead them into Blingdenstone. Now that could complicate the entry into Blingdenstone because now the PCs not only have to vouch for themselves, but also have to find someone to vouch for the Myconids. But on the upside is that if that allows for that task to be completed, and there are definitely areas where the Myconids can sort of foster growth of certain fungi that would be useful to the deep gnomes. So this could be a potential tie-in which I've not experimented with when I ran Out of the Abyss, but that's a possible idea that you could actually build towards a were-rat Myconid deep gnome colony in the Underdark, and that'll be a story to tell. Now the salt part, the salt task list, for me, I don't see any real having read this section of Blingdenstone and the connection between Woke Salt Baron and the Pig Shines, you could say that maybe if the PCs do negotiate, like if they, instead of making Word Salt Barons sell the gems to Kano Pig Shine for the gems, you could say that he's trying to get a salt deal from the White Shell mines in Blingdenstone, and you could change the quest instead of meeting with Kazu Pig Shine, the PCs are supposed to meet with the family who runs the White Shell mines and seal the deal so that they can actually begin trade between Greco-Stark and Blingdenstone. That's one possible way, because in return, Word Salt Baron could trade weapons and send the weapons back to Blingdenstone just in time for the battle of Blingdenstone in case. But all this you would have to sort of implement these as the PCs enter into Greco-Stark first before Blingdenstone. So that's, or you could also make that the quest where the PCs travel from Blingdenstone to Greco-Stark for that reason. Okay. And okay, the last idea, which is for me, is the best what to do with the basilisk eggs when the PCs find them in Entomoc's Boon, outside on the outskirts of Blingdenstone. If you're not keen on the idea of the PCs hatching the eggs and having basilisk pets, you could still let the PCs keep the eggs and let the egg be useful in the second half of the adventure, when the PCs actually have to go to a place called the Graven Hollow Library. And in the one way that the PCs can only get into the Graven Hollow Library is through a ring, and it requires a basilisk guide, who's a little strange, I think, because he can talk, and you could say that you could use the eggs as sort of an offering to this talking basilisk, who then becomes like a single parent to the eggs, and that's the payment that he accepts for guiding the PCs to Graven Hollow Library. So that sort of gets rid of the headache of having the PCs having access to basilisk pets, and also giving significance to the finding the basilisk eggs on a later part of the adventure. So that's my other idea of how you want to deal with the basilisk eggs in Blingdenstone chapter. So this wasn't as long as I thought it would be, which is good. So I've basically completed all my coverage of Blingdenstone and my ideas as well. So yeah, so I guess that's all from me for tonight, for chapter 6 of the Abyss. I hope whatever you hear on this video right now is useful to you. helpful to you in any kind of way, you can let me know in the comments if you are so inclined. And I guess that's it for me for tonight. And next video is obviously the end of the first half of Audio Abyss. That one shouldn't be a real challenge to go through, which is chapter 7, and that's called Escape into the Underdark. So this is the Question GM signing off for now, and I'll see you in the next one. Okay, bye.